quick reminder, Pearl Abyss, parent company of EVE Online. We always talk about them here. It's our regular quarterly earnings report that we get from them. There's always a call associated with it. It's in Korean, but we always have a very good translation. And this is where we can see how the parent company is doing, which is very important for CCP and EVE Online, because while EVE Online is the smaller part of this company, it's still a quite significant part. So about depending on the month, about 20% of the revenue or so. And so this is our quarterly check-in. And so let's see what they've been talking about this quarter. And Crota, as usual, you jump in when you want to add things. So first thing immediately what we notice is, yes, there's a big drop in revenue from Q4 to Q1, but as Crota always says, you have to look at quarter over quarter or year over year rather than quarter over quarter. If we compare it to Q1 in 2024, it's also a drop, but obviously it's not as significant. We're talking about a few percentage points here, 2 percentage point drop from Q1 24 to Q1 25. But nevertheless, we do see a Q4 to Q1 drop that is very significant. And while some of it can be explained away with holidays, etc., certainly one big thing that happened in between is that Pearl Abyss prematurely canceled Black Desert Mobile in China. So that was something that they were hoping for to deliver significant revenues, and it just wasn't successful. And they, instead of ending it in April, they ended it in January, which is a very, very clear message that it just wasn't working, right, Koda?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, in every quarter, Q4 to Q1, there has been a decline. The only quarter that has not occurred was in the first quarter of 2020, when the pandemic was all over us.
Mm-hmm.
But then, yes, to your point, there was an early sort of coming to the end of an agreement with in China, which sort of accelerated the decline as well.
Yeah,
but it's just always the same. Always the same. It's the way you compare any business when you look at quarterly numbers. It's always the quarter a year before to the quarter to today. So Q1 24 to Q1 25 is the more sensible way to look at it. Strips out holidays and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in case nosy gamer is watching, if you guys are interested, he also does a write-up every quarter on these numbers, and he pointed out last time that Q4 certainly had stuff like EVE Galaxy Conquest in it, which the opinions, our opinions differ on how big that part was, but certainly for transparency's sake, if you think that EVE Galaxy Conquest, the 4X mobile game, was very successful, then that will certainly be one part of the drop from Q4 to Q1. It looks like, just from, if you're looking at current coverage, current activity on their subreddit and other soft measures there, or soft KPIs there, it doesn't look like Galaxy Conquest is hugely successful. But as Nosy, rightfully so, pointed out to me last time, certainly there could be some whales playing it, and there could be people spending a lot of money in it, as we have seen from other mobile games. So we don't know how big that number is, but there's a lot of different factors that are different now in Q1 and versus Q4. One being Black Desert Mobile, one being holiday period, and the other being Galaxy Conquest, as we don't know how that is developing. I think in terms of outlook, they mentioned eFrontier here, free 10-day access. So in the call itself, it is apparent that besides their other big IP, which is Crimson Desert, that's the big, on the Pearl Abyss side, the big IP that they're waiting for. They're putting a lot of hope into eFrontier, and they're talking about eFrontier a lot more now. And part of it is because the same reason that CCP tries to avoid talking about the crypto aspect of the game or the blockchain aspect of the game. That is something that Pearl Abyss rather leans in on because that's what investors like to hear, right? But just because they're buzzwords and they're new and they signal innovation, and so as long as they can keep up this this mood of excitement of something new coming, I think it's going to help. And if we look at the stock price, even after these numbers, we're going to see on the next page here that their profit also dropped very significantly, but they're breaking even. And while profit is a lot lower than Q1 2024, they're still breaking even on running some very, very old IP here. So after this announcement, the stock price still went up about, I don't know, 6, 7, 8%. So while these numbers don't seem fantastic, they obviously were better than analysts expected, right, Crota?
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think there's a second thing going on. I think investors in markets globally are rotating into businesses that are not affected by the US tariffs. And this is a prime example. I mean, there are no tariffs on Black Desert or Eve Online. So in that sense, the game is progressing. And then the other thing, of course, is they did mention Crimson Desert, and everything relies on Crimson Desert, and they confirmed it's going to be launched in the fourth quarter. It feels like it's been delayed again, so towards the end of the fourth quarter. So you can sort of see people sort of moving some of the revenue into 2026, but they still sort of confirmed it was going to be launched in the fourth quarter. And just to remind everybody, Crimson Desert has been delayed about 6 times. So the fact it wasn't materially delayed for a seventh time was probably a positive to investors as well.
Yeah, and we talked earlier about silver linings. I mean, certainly, if you look at what they are doing now, they're 80 billion Korean won in revenue, and then breaking even on a relatively normal quote unquote month. They are running a 20-year-old game and a 10-year-old game, and they are able to at least break even while developing 2 or 3 major new games. So I think that's what investors will focus on. The stock price is nowhere near pandemic level, but it's it's developing nicely, and I think a lot of this, just like the 2024 numbers that we discussed for CCP Games last week, so much is riding on the new IP. And while I wish them, the best of luck, Crimson Desert, I don't know. I mean, it's not a game that I would typically play, so I don't, reception is quite hard to interpret there. But I mentioned this last week as well. I think for Eve Frontier and Eve Vanguard, I am very skeptical in terms of revenue making, significant revenue making abilities. But obviously, I'm rooting for them, and I hope everything turns out for the best. But sometimes in video game development, you just don't know, right? You just don't know. One other thing I want to mention is, if you're wondering why in Q4 24 there's a massive net profit here, and that was mainly due to their financial activities. So this has nothing to do with their daily operations of creating and selling video games. This was mainly on the investment side. So when they're buying or selling assets or crypto or whatever it is they're doing on the side in their Pearl Abyss capital department or subsidiary, right? So that was a one-time thing, and that's not something that we're that is going to matter for going forward.
Yeah, this whole Pearl Abyss Capital is a great big black box. It's actually got its own website. You can see what sort of games they're investing in, but quarter after quarter, it turns what is an operating loss into an operating profit. And I'm pretty sure there's no cash associated with this. So I'm pretty sure if we looked at the cash flows for Q1, you would see less cash because they made an operating loss. The uplift they get in terms of the asset valuations and any FX is completely non-cash. It's just we think this asset is worth more. That there might be a good reason for that. So we're writing up the value of the asset, and that turns in a profit. But it's nothing to do with cash. So one day when I get enough time, I'll look into what Pearl Abyss Capital really is. But it's not clear to me. I mean, so that third chart to me is it's interesting, but it would only really become relevant if they start selling some of those assets to generate cash.
Yeah, so we have to talk about the truth, which is an operating loss of about 5 billion Korean won, which is their loss from just day-to-day operations, making and selling video games. If
And the other thing,
interestingly enough, Crota, one thing that goes in there as well is the government grants, right? We know that CCP is getting what was it, about $6 million a year from the government as in the form of subsidies. So that is technically that is in the operating profit, but technically it's also you could argue that it shouldn't be, and that would make things even worse because that's not an insignificant number in terms of overall.
No. So 6 million for the EVE Online itself, CCP itself got. Now that was at least 2 million of that was in Iceland, and maybe the rest was, but I suspect 4 million was elsewhere. Countries for things like video gaming and filmmaking will provide grants to companies. So it's a it's completely legitimate thing. So I don't look upon it too negatively, to be honest. The big issue would be if the government, the UK government suddenly decided, right, no more grants for films or video gaming, then we'd have a bit of an issue. But
no, absolutely. But I think it's fair to say that honestly, if you can only run your company profitably with government subsidies, then there's something wrong with the company. I mean, would be my opinion, because you're not profitable on your own. You're only profitable because your government is propping you up.
oh yeah, sure. And the government does that, of course, because they want their country to be a center of talent for this, because of all the sort of ultimately they'll have made a calculation that this brings in more than what they give out. The other thing, of course, that one of the reasons we used to look at these Q1's quarterly numbers quite carefully was they used to tell us a split between EVE Online or CCP and Black Desert. And for the second quarter in a row, they haven't done that. And the analysts didn't really ask about that during the quarterly call. Now, the way the stock market works is the analysts might not ask on the conference call, but they will probably ask privately. So we've sort of in my blog, I've made an estimation as to kind of what it is, and then the second thing we don't know anymore, and I think this is becoming much more important, is I suspect the revenues of EVE Online or CCP are much higher in terms of all these sales they do, the Omega sales and the Plex sales, than it was, say, 4 years ago. So it would be it would actually be quite interesting one day to sort of work out what are the subs doing, and what are these sort of in-game sales or out of game sales doing, because I think that's becoming more material now.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have speculated as to their motivations for not splitting it out anymore. There's possibly they were already preparing for a Black Desert mobile disaster, not wanting to communicate it, etc., etc. Because certainly in the last quarters, we would have loved to see that split, because it would have been very, very interesting. Because one thing we're seeing here in the slide that I'm showing here is that the revenue by region has fluctuated massively. So the North America EU's part of the revenue went from 56% in Q3 to 52% in Q4, and then it jumped to 58% in Q1. And certainly, a lot of that is going to have to do with Black Desert Mobile in China, because that is what propped it up in Q4. Because I don't think Eve Galaxy Conquest did that, right? It's probably Black Desert Mobile. We don't see the mobile split anymore either, Crota. We used to see the mobile and PC split. That's gone too, huh?
Yeah.
So,
I don't know why, but the disclosure is falling a bit.
Yeah, so I think it would make sense that they're trying to hide maybe some of those impacts due to Black Desert Mobile. If we're not seeing, because first they took away the IP split and then they took away the mobile to PC split, and they have this trend to being less transparent. And I think we talked about the last time, but they have a new director of finance, so obviously that might have to do with just the overall attitude towards transparency in the market. But as you say, probably there's they might be sharing this unofficially, and it's there are probably different ways of finding out. But our best way was looking at the CCP Games numbers in 2024 last week, which clearly showed, at least for EVE Online, a positive revenue development. So overall, you can assume that EVE Online IP revenue is doing fine currently, and it's probably Black Desert revenue that is hurting a bit. If we jump into expenses, I just want to point out one thing, which is this right here. So Q4 labor expenses to Q1 up 5%, and even if you compare it versus last year, we're also up 5%. So they are investing more into their people. If you look at the headcount went up from 739 to 761. So clearly in Q1 they did some hiring, both on the development staff and the business staff. But the percentage increase in headcount is not as big as the percentage increase in labor costs. So same as CCP Games we saw last week, there is an increase in the cost per employee. So they're either paying their employees more, or they have more expenses associated with hiring and paying their people. So but overall, I think they're still investing in their people, which is a very good sign that they are trying to get these titles out the door, right? Bruno?
Yeah, I think it's all hands to the deck to get Crimson Desert out in Q4. And then obviously CCP, I think, increasing staff a bit to work on Vanguard and eFrontier.
Yeah, interestingly, advertising costs have been very erratic. So if you look at advertising, Q1 24 was 5.6 billion, and then Q1 25 was 7 billion, and in between, we've even had numbers as high as 12 billion there, 11.8 billion in Q4. So clearly, they're spending a lot of money on advertising, which is going to be. I mean, certainly, I'm seeing a lot of EVE Online ads, but the focus is probably going to be more on Black Desert, and probably significantly in Q4 on Black Desert Mobile, and possibly also Galaxy Conquest, which I'm seeing a lot of ads for as well.
And holiday season as well.
Yeah. So now it's back down, but certainly those advertising costs are going to increase when the new titles hit. Right? That's going to be the prime.
Definitely.
If we look at the outlook, so we focus on EVE Online here, so let's look at EVE's. They're talking about new expansion pack. They always talk about pack. It cracks me up. Expansion pack Legion, and that Fanfest happened. So we all know this, but obviously that is something that is going to be relevant for investors. And then in terms of growth strategy, they talk about EVE Frontier again. As I said earlier, EVE Frontier was playing a big role in this call. And then, Crimson Desert is on the way out the door. Or they have various shows where they're showing progress, showing in-game footage, etc., etc. So overall, the numbers are not great, but they're better than expected. We don't know the split anymore, but we suspect EVE Online is doing better comparatively than Black Desert, and all hope is on the new titles, EVE Frontier ETH Vanguard and Crimson Desert. Is that fair, Crota? Anything else to add?
No, very fair. It's always beyond me why in their highlights or the outlook they have Fanfest, because that is kind of irrelevant to the numbers. But no, I think your outlook is spot on. They have to get Crimson Desert out of the door. I mean, to put this in perspective, Crimson Desert is going to be, they think, will be quite material in Q4 and then huge in 2026. And I sort of shudder to think what Pearl Abyss would look like if Crimson Desert failed.
Yeah, you know what? You know what my theory on the Fanfest is? They keep mentioning Fanfest because for years and years, their investor communication has hinged, their EVE Online investor communication has hinged on the very loyal veteran player base of EVE Online that you can monetize the shit out of, and showing that that there's an EVE Fanfest going on every year and that people show up every year is reinforcement of that argument, and so it's very investor relevant for them. So
yeah, they're monetizing the player base in quite a clever way. I mean, they jacked up the subs by about 30%. That hits everybody. But if they do these Omega and Plex sales, that is, that's discretionary. You can take part of them as long as you want. And you've got to assume they'll keep on doing that until they can't do it anymore, which is probably a driver of the Plex price in game as well. So when they talk about that it's a very loyal player base and we all sort of shudder and think, oh, subs are going to go up. Well, probably not. They'll keep on doing these Plex sales, MCT sales for real money. And then and the reason it's relevant to us is if they do a real money sale, they then have to do an in-game sale straight afterwards because they've got to find buyers for the Plex that they've sold to people for real money, and they've got to find buyers of Plex in-game to do that.
yeah, and if there's anything that we have shown in the last few weeks by the numbers that came out, CCP is still selling a lot of Plex and or skill extractors. So it's clearly, we can complain we can complain about it all we want. It seems that the EVE player base is very monetizable, and that's what investors like to hear. There are some questions in chat that I'd like to be answered, or that I'd like to answer. Lucas saying, is there any chance that a failure of Crimson Desert causes them to cut back on CCP to reduce their all-around losses? I don't think the connection is definitely there, but it's not there as you would think. I think they are looking at this very differently. I mean, I think they've always looked at CCP games as something that is very separate from the rest of the operations that they do, and I think they are going to look at Crimson Desert as completely separate from EVE Online. What's probably going to happen if EVE Online, if Crimson Desert does exceptionally bad, it's going to be it might drive them or force their hand on what they're going to do with CCP games, because either CCP games is doing well and they might focus more on CCP games IP, or they might be looking at CCP games as an offloading candidate, and they might be looking for a new buyer to go a different direction. So, but I don't think there's a direct link between the two. I think they are looking at it very separately, right, Coda?
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, if they got to that stage where they thought, blimey, we've got to sell an asset, and there's nothing in Pearl Abyss capital, so they'd have to sell CCP. Then to dress it up to a potential buyer, they would have to sort of show how profitable EVE Online is, and then let the potential buyer decide: do we just stop EVE Frontier and the rest of it? But yes, so that's why all eyes on Crimson Desert. Not only does it have to be launched pretty much the end of this year, but it's got to work.
Mm-hmm. And the last question: have these investors actually looked at EVE Frontier? I had the pleasure of talking to some of the investors present at FanFest last year, and most of them are not gamers, right? Like there is an overlap, but most of them are not going to be gamers. They don't get it. They do not understand and look at these gaming companies as a gamer would. And I think that's it's kind of like the issue of CSM input to get game development, right? Like you have all this vast knowledge out there you could tap in on, and most gamers will understand, oh, is this game going to work or is it not going to work, if they have played it, if they have looked at it, because they know the history, they know the context, etc., etc. I think it's very difficult for investors to look at Eve Frontier from a position of, oh, are Eve Online players going to be playing this game? Because they are not online players and they don't play this game and they play neither game. They look at it as, oh, look, there's a successful IP that's been successful for 20 years. They're developing something new. Ooh, blockchain. Sounds good. Tell me more about it. Here's my money. Until you lose money, I'm going to be, you know, excited about what's happening. I think that's way more driving investment rather than actual quote unquote gamer knowledge, right, Coda?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, were these investors Pearl Abyss investors or A16Z
Mm-hmm.
investors?
Oh, for the ones I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 2 years ago, so in the 2024 FanFest, they had an investor conference going on at the same time, and it was very much crypto focused. So I think they were there for Eve Frontier back. It was like, I think they just came up with the name around then, but these are investors from many different companies. These weren't specifically A16Z investors. These were just people that were there to hear Hilmar talk about
Okay.
blockchain or crypto-based game development, I think.
Okay. Because I was going to say, if they were, say, investors in Pearl Abyss itself, you can bet your bottom dollar they would be asking what are the player numbers for Eve Online, and they'd be asking for the churn. How many do you lose every year? Therefore, how many do you have to sort of get to stand still? What is the cost of customer acquisition? What is the lifetime value of a player, and all of that sort of stuff. But which is all the sort of stuff we want to know as well. But we just can't get our hands on what the actual player numbers are. They're not disclosed anywhere.
And I mean, honestly, if you ask an investor, he's going to look at, he or she's going to look at, oh, look, um, EVE Online's doing great, and I'm sure all of these players are going to flock to a new game that uses crypto, right? Which would be the most tone deaf, uh, assumption ever. But I'm pretty sure half of the investors are going to do that because they're not going to be able to research into the history of what does Eve Frontier mean in the context of Eve Online, and are people actually going to go play that or not? Which is not to say that there aren't going to be people playing Eve Frontier, but I think if investors knew about the vast part of Eve Online players that are just not going to touch it in principle, like just out of principle, then that would be a cause for massive concern for any investor. In this case, mostly A16Z, because they're the ones that have invested most in eFrontier. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the final thing I'll say is there's a chart on my blog. I look at the rolling 12-month revenue. So in the first 4 quarters that they owned it, they were doing about 57 billion won. And now the 12 months, the sort of 12-month rolling, if I include Q1, it's the chart below that, we're now at 90. So actually, in terms of revenue progression, CCP have not done a bad job for Pearl Abyss. It's just by the time you get to the profit line, it looks a bit hopeless.
This is 12-month revenue overall.
Yeah, so it's the last 4 quarters added together, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
So what you see, the 90 billion won is Q2, Q3, Q4, and then Q1 2025 added in.
Yeah. Although we have to, I mean, this is not operating profit. This is net profit, right?
This is revenue. This is the
Oh, this is just revenue.
of
Oh yeah, all right, yeah.
of
So
of
okay.
of CCP.
It's good. Yeah. Yeah, that is good. And as you know, I think CCP Games right now is in a much better position than they were a year or two ago. I think they're contributing more. They have growing numbers, and so their position has improved significantly.
Yeah.
Okay.
They've done well.
Cool. All right. So we'll leave it at that. We're gonna head over to MER. Quick reminder: if you have questions for CCP Ratati, we're gonna have him on Wednesday, and so if you want to on Wednesday evening, so if you want to ask questions, post them in Discord, and then tune in on Wednesday to catch Ratati live on this channel. Great, Koda, thanks for joining us. I'm going to take a 30-second break, and then we're going to be back with the MER. All right.